Hey, welcome back to JG3 Reviews. My name is James, and here I like to explore the world of fountain pens, ink, and paper. And today, I've got some extra that I want to do as well. So this is the Scriveiner, and if you're on Amazon and you've ever clicked on anything remotely fountain pen related, you have had the algorithm say, you know you need to buy this pen, right? Lots of times. And you may have wondered, who is Scriveiner, Scriveiner, however you say that? And are those pens any good? Well, in this review, we're going to explore whether or not the pen is good. We'll look at pros and cons and design and all that good stuff, as we usually do. I also want to give you a heads up. I'm going to review this pen today, and then there's another pen extremely similar to it, but not the same, that I want to review as well. And then I'm going to have a follow-up video after these two reviews. And I want to answer a question that's been asked several times lately by viewers of this channel, and that is, how do I know when I see brands like this that I've never heard of before, and some of them may be, Amazon-specific brands or other retailer brands, how do I know if that's going to be a good pen, and how do I know that I'm getting a good deal, and all those kinds of questions? How do you navigate the lesser-known pen makers and mass pen makers and find a good pen or avoid a serious dud? So I'm going to review this pen. I'm going to review the other pen very soon, and then I'm going to share with you some pointers that I've learned, some of them the hard way, in a follow-up video. All right, enough yip-yap. Let's get to this pen. And when your Scriveiner arrives, it comes in what is a pretty nice little presentation box. If you're giving this pen as a gift, and I think that's a significant part of their market, then that is nice and helpful. You open up that tab. We'll get to the pen in just a second. And beneath the pen bed is, first, two ink cartridges. This does use international shorts, and inside this are two ink cartridges, one black, one blue, and those are made by Schneider in Germany. And then you will find the instruction manual and the very brief introduction to the pen. This comes in English, German, French, and Spanish. And it does include this brief description. Scriveiner is a British company set up by husband and wife team Justin and Yan Ning. We live in London, and we are passionate about design, quality, and customer service, and gives you their contact information. My impression is that these are spec pens, where they had these pens made in China, but they are spec'd out and commissioned by this couple in England, as several other pen companies do, some of them really big name pen companies. Now, getting to the pen. This is a brass pen with black lacquer, with gold-plated trim, and a gold-plated nib. So let's start at the top, where we have the Scriveiner S logo in that finial, and then you come down to the clip, which is kind of a thick clip, works well with a rounded tab that makes that easy to go over fabric or pen loops, whatever. Then you come down to the trim band, which says Scriveiner, and this is also filled with black for the letters, so that actually looks quite nicely done. You come back around and you find the Scriveiner logo again. Come on down the barrel, you have another gold-plated trim ring, and then just a simple base at the end of the barrel. It is a snap cap, makes a nice quality sound, and it is not loose. It doesn't turn around, jiggle, or rattle. So it is pretty well put together, and a nice solid pen. The weight is nice, fairly well balanced when capped, and no real niggles there. Now, some of you will recognize that clip, and I mentioned that I'm going to review another pen that seems extremely closely related to that, and that is this Picasso Gentleman. They aren't identical, and not all the parts are interchangeable, but they definitely share some DNA. And I'll cover that in the other video. What I want to focus on today is what is unique to this pen. So, that snap cap, again, works well. It posts very well, very securely, and while it does add back weight because of the weight of that cap, I don't find that too uncomfortable at all. Now, it is a thinner pen. Some of you won't like that, but it does have good grip on that lacquered section. Now, opening up the pen, we will find that there is a Schmidt converter, and as usual with Schmidt, that's a good quality converter. Threads here are metal on metal, and then you come to that black section, which has good grip. It's not slippery at all. Then that standard plastic feed for the number 5 nib. Now you notice I haven't shown you the nib yet. The nibs are steel number 5 nibs. This is a fine, and it is gold plated. However, on my pen, the gold plating is starting to wear off, I would say, prematurely. I've had this pen for a year and a half, and I have used it quite a bit, and it's been through several cleanings, but those cleanings are careful and not abrasive or anything like that, just a typical flushes and cleanouts and things like that. So I was surprised to find that the plating is coming off of that nib after a short time. So be aware of that. Now to the positive on the nib, this is a Schmidt number 5 steel nib, and it writes quite well, as we'll see in the writing test here in a moment. It is a nice, smooth nib, and I have no complaints on the performance of the nib. Now, I do want to point out that it does have a plastic liner inside that cap, both for the snap cap mechanism and to prevent dry out. I do find that this pen dries out if it's left alone for a few days. And like many pens, I find that with regular use, dry out is not an issue, but if I leave it for, say, 4 or 5 days, I'm going to need to dip it in water right quick to revive that ink. Now for a quick size comparison and maybe even a little bit more. I've chosen all of these pens very carefully as I think they can be easily cross-shopped to the Scriveiner pen. So this is a Cross Bailey Light. I think actually the Cross Bailey would compare more favorably to the pen in terms of materials, price, and everything else, but this is the pen that I've got. And like the Scriveiner, the Cross Bailey is a pen designed in the West but manufactured in China to a specification. So, as I said, big companies do this too. And some of the specs are actually surprisingly similar. Now, I actually prefer the Scrivener's Schmidt nib to that of the Cross Bailey. I think it's a nicer fine to write with. Then you have the Jinhao X350, the absolute bargain in this lineup with an excellent medium number 6 steel nib, and is also a nice solid black lacquered metal pen. And then, maybe the ringer in this group, the Pilot Metropolitan. It is actually the best value for money in this lineup. I'm going to tell you that straight up, because this pen is half what the Scriveiner is, and for a lot of people that will make up their mind. And depending on your preferences, if you prefer a Western fine, the Scriveiner is the better nib. However, if you prefer that thinner Japanese fine, the Pilot's nib is hard to beat for the money. None of these are bad pens. They all write quite well. Where they really vary the most is design and price. Now here are the pens, uncapped and unposted. And while there is a little bit of variation, there's not a great deal of difference in the length of these pens. If anything, what you have is a great difference in the size of their grips and in the degree of step downs, which I've inadvertently put in order. So the least to the greatest step down in that lineup of pens. And here are the pens in their posted lengths. All right, so this is the Scriveiner. As far as I know, there's not a model number here. It is a fine steel nib that is by Schmidt, and it writes quite nicely. Show you the wetness, which is pretty typical for a fine nib. There's no real line variation. You wouldn't really expect that. Those look terrible. It's hay fever season, and I've already written this 3 times because I keep sneezing through it. So I'm just a little bit rattled here. Now this nib writes quite smoothly. Now before I continue on, let me address a couple of things about sound and nibs. Very often in the feedback on videos, people will say, oh, that sounds like a terrible scratchy nib. And it will be a pen and a nib that is actually excellent and smooth and just has no scratchiness whatsoever. Why does that happen? Well, there are a couple of factors. One, I have a very sensitive microphone that's just up here above the camera, and it picks up everything. I don't edit out the nib noise that it picks up, and by the way, if I stop talking, it amplifies, because I want you to hear that nib. Now, you need to understand that that is an exaggeration of the noise. Nibs are not silent. Writing is not silent. Paper is not silent. You're going to make noise. And so, for example, this one is a nice smooth nib, but it still sounds a bit like a pencil. Same would be true for a Platinum 3776. But people will say, oh, that sounds terrible. It's scratchy. You have a horrible pen. Well, no, I don't. What happens is sound gets amplified. So, when you're watching pen reviews, mine or anybody else's, keep in mind that you're listening maybe through headphones, through pods, or you've got it turned up on your computer or your television, and you've amplified the noise, and the microphone has amplified the noise. And so pay closer attention to the feedback of the reviewer, whoever that is. So if they're saying it's pencil-like and smooth, take their word for it that it's pencil-like and smooth. It's not necessarily a scratchy nib. Because let me tell you, if I get a scratchy nib, I'm going to tell you it's a scratchy nib because I do not like that. I do not enjoy that, and I'm not going to recommend that. It's just, limitations of the sound technology. I could edit all that sound of the paper and the nib interacting, but then you wouldn't have an accurate review. However, just know that, writing up close with this microphone, it amplifies, and that doesn't mean that it's scratchy. Hopefully that's a helpful explanation. If you have any questions about what I'm saying there or need me to explain that further, I'd be glad to. Just mention that in the comments below. All right, let's talk pros and cons. First, I'm going to say the nib and the accessories. The nib is a Schmidt nib. It writes really well, is typical for their good performance, and it comes with good accessories. It comes with a Schmidt converter, which is a good converter. It comes with a couple of good ink cartridges. If you're gifting it to a new pen user, that's a good thing. And it comes with a nice presentation box. I think it's a good gift pen, and it's a solid performer. The pen writes well, it does its job well, it's held up well, with the exception of the first con. That gold plating wearing off so quickly is definitely a con for the pen. Now that's one that's easily avoided if you buy the pen with the chrome trim accents rather than the plated trim accents, and then you just don't have to worry about that. And that brings up another pro, kind of a minor pro, and that is that I do like some of the colors that this pen is offered in and the finishes. So this is the black and gold. There is also a British racing green that I think looks quite good, and a red and a blue that look quite good. So in terms of finding a pen that looks good, especially if you're giving that as a gift, that is available. That's a minor pro because that would be true of a lot of pens, but it certainly is not true of all pens. Now, a con I'm going to say is the price. It's about $45 on Amazon, and I think that's a bit high, but it does compare favorably with, say, a cross pen, which is going to cost you about as much, made of the same kind of materials, and is also a commissioned pen made in China. So I think the comparison is more than fair, and it performs as well. So there's that. You don't get the history of a cross pen, and for some that is going to matter, especially if you're giving it as a gift to someone who might appreciate the history of a cross pen. I'm a cross fan myself, so I'm not picking on them here, but it does compare favorably to their modern pens in the same price range. I have the Waterman emblem, which I really like, and I like the form factor better of the emblem. But honestly, this Schmidt nib performs better than that emblem nib does for me, and this pen is less than that emblem. But again, you get Waterman history, and there's some loyalty there for a lot of people, so I get that, and I'm even kind of one of those people. I get it. But I would say the price is just a bit high, and I'll explain that further when I do the follow-up video here in a week or two, because when I compare this with the other pen, that's when this con makes even more sense. The pen has been reliable for me. I've had no issues with hard starts. Again, if I leave it on my desk for a week, yeah, I'm going to need to dip it in my little water jar over here. but that would be it. Otherwise, it has performed great. No leaks, no problems, no clogs, or anything silly like that. All right, so I'm curious. Any of you have experience with the Scriveiner pen? They talked about in the instructions that customer service is a priority. I haven't had to use that. Do any of you have experience with their customer service? Do they live up to the claim in the booklet? I'm curious about that side of the equation because at this price you do expect good customer service. So, what do you think? Is this a pen for you? If you own one, what is your impression? Share that in the comments below. And if you haven't done it yet, like, share, and subscribe this video. Check out other videos here on the channel. God bless you and have a great week.